Hi, this is Rick Carter with another episode of Encore Entrepreneurs. Is it time for your second act? Today I'm talking to Russell Colbourne. Russell is a CFO and an entrepreneur who specialises in helping organisations to adapt to the rapidly changing internal and external environments. He has been integral with the startup of many successful businesses, including Virgin Airlines in Australia with Richard Branson, an air cargo company in the US, and an in-flight entertainment company in Europe. He has worked in many different industries, including aviation, manufacturing, transport, health, digital media, commercial services, and even a law firm. Please enjoy. Well, hi, Russell. Great to catch up with you and hear some of your fascinating story.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks, Rick, for inviting me.
So how does a guy who started off flying helicopters for the Royal Navy and then became a chartered accountant come to Australia with Richard Branson to start an airline and now is starting their own entrepreneurial businesses? Just give us a snapshot of how you reached that decision.
Well, I think, Rick, I've been a closet entrepreneur all my life without even realising it. For so many years, I've worked with organisations introducing new products, new services with other people's capital. And it came to the point where I thought, this is an easy game. This is a lot of fun. I quite enjoy this. Mm-hmm. A new challenge every day. When we were at Virgin, we introduced some of the world's first things, whatever they may be, world's first limousine transfers for business class passengers. And my job there was just to do the cost-benefit analysis. And then suddenly someone said to me, well, there's no one to actually do these projects. Can you help us out, please? So from that, I got involved in all kinds of day-to-day new projects, from handheld check-ins at Heathrow Airport, which is a world's first, to a limo boat up and down the Thames, which, again, another world's first, to providing all kinds of wonderful customer service opportunities for passengers, which people always thought was a customer service initiative, but was just basically us having some fun. And Richard's a lot of fun. He carries a party around with him wherever he goes, or did. And I babysat him for 3 days when he came to Australia to launch Virgin Blue. So that was a 3 days that I'll never get back in my life, because it was 24/7 partying, network, interviews, meetings, getting him from A to B, getting him to be where he had to be, and just an exciting place to be. So back in the early 2000s, after we launched Virgin Blue, I went back to the UK. I was offered a directorship role in the UK for an aviation company. And I went there. We went there for a couple of years, myself and my wife, and we had a great time. And then circumstances happen in life. You get to a point where you have family choices and decisions that have to be made, and my wife fell pregnant with twins. And we decided that the only way we were going to get a life outside of twins, a business life back, was to make sure we had plenty of family around us. And Adelaide is my wife's family home. So we decided to come back to Adelaide, didn't know what we were going to do, had no idea, in fact. I started my own consultancy. I bought a recording studio. I bought a number of businesses. I bought interests in businesses, and some of them I've developed and grown, some of them I've sold, and some of them I've lost money on. And that's been the case for the last 15 years, I suppose. We've been in Adelaide since 2006. I've worked on the East Coast with a number of venture capitalist type people, invested a lot of money in gold mines and lost it, invested a lot of money in transport services and made it. So some things you win on and some things you lose on. But being an entrepreneur gives you that everyday challenge. And I think my accounting background has provided me with that analysis, that left brain, right brain thing, that I can think with one side of the brain on the numbers and evaluate projects on the other side of the brain for the fun of it. And that's really why I'm involved in entrepreneur programs, because I think it's exciting and fun.
Well, Russell, I mean, everybody, whenever you talk entrepreneurship, Richard Branson's name comes up. Not everybody's been fortunate enough to work with him. Not everybody's been fortunate enough to know him. I spent a day with him, and that was enough for me. What was the single biggest takeaway, apart from the fun, that you took from Branson?
Well, he's the ultimate people puppeteer. He really is a fantastic guy with a lot of charisma. He attracts the best and brightest around him. I don't know how I fell into that category, but I got hauled in by... I was appointed by Brett Godfrey originally. So Brett Godfrey, who started Virgin Blue here in Australia, he was the chap that interviewed me in a bar in Crawley, West Sussex. Him and a guy called Manny Gill. Brett was the finance manager for Virgin Atlantic, and Manny Gill was his number two. And Brett and Manny were good friends, and they invited me to an interview in a bar. As I say, we had a pint of beer and chatted, and I think I passed the barbecue test, which is being able to have a beer over the bar and just generally get on. So I joined Virgin Atlantic in '94. Brett and I worked closely together, and during that time, Richard would have parties for the staff of Virgin Atlantic at his house in Oxford. It was just unheard of, for someone to throw parties for over 1,000 people, 1,500 or so, at his house, in the grounds of his house. He'd rent bouncy castles for the kids, and there was always Domino's Pizza, I remember. They always had a stand, and the kids would always go up, and everything was free. So these were summer parties, and he would stand at the gate of the property and welcome every single person across. It was a hedge gate, if you like, and you had to jump over this hedge, and he'd welcome everyone. He'd stand there for 3 or 4 hours welcoming everybody to the party, and then he'd get up and say something at the end. So the guy's got incredible resolve, huge determination. When he puts his mind to something, of course, he does it. And if you've read any of his books, it's screw it, let's do it. So he just decides to do it. And I think that's one of the biggest lessons I've ever learned, is that it's always better to do something and seek forgiveness after than to actually procrastinate and not actually go forward with the program and think, well, if I don't do this, the customers might not like it. If I don't get it 100% right, then it won't sell perfectly. But I think Richard's view is, well, get it out there, get it done, get something out there. We launched, I mentioned it earlier, the world's first limo boat. So this was a boat that went up and down the Thames in London from Brentford Dock, which is about 5 miles from Heathrow Airport, right the way up to Tower Bridge. And because of the M4 motorway in West London, we could actually get along the river faster than we can get along the motorway. And this was a huge publicity stunt. There was no real customer benefit in it. We ran it for 6 months. On the second day of running it, we had the British Olympic Rowing Committee complain to us because we were causing waves where they were trying to row along the Thames there at Richmond and Brentford, around that area. And then we were hauled over by the police. The river police came along and asked us what we were up to. There's actually a speed limit between Brentford and one of the bridges, I can't remember which one now, 6 knots, about 8 miles an hour or whatever, or 10 kilometres an hour. And we stuck to that speed limit for that period. And then after this bridge, and it's quite a way up the Thames, you can open up the boat. And we were on this boat called a rigid raider. A rigid raider is what the Marines use to launch their attacks on shores. So you had a bunch of executives in suits. We would suit them up into waterproof suits and put a helmet on them and put them on this rigid raider. They'd just flown in from New York on the early morning red eye, and get them into London for 8 o'clock in the morning for their meetings. And we'd suit them up, and we'd 70 miles an hour down the Thames, almost 100 kilometres an hour, hugely fast, almost James Bond-like, ridiculous. And the police called us over and asked us what we were doing, because obviously the police go up and down the Thames all the time, and then we were new faces on the block, if you like. And we explained to them that, we've got this new service and yada yada, and Richard's behind it, and it's all fantastic. And they were laughing and joking and, great, and have a safe day and watch out for the seagulls. Next day in the press was a big headline in one of the newspapers that read, "Cops Sink Virgin Aquatic." Now, the press had not even interviewed us. They had not spoken to the police. All they had was a photograph. And they made up the headline, and they made up the story. And it was really quite funny to see. But, it was...
And all good publicity.
Amazing. And it's what Richard's really good at, is publicity, of course. Tanks in Times Square and with his Virgin Cola, and being a bride scaling down buildings and whatever for Virgin Bride. Publicity, free publicity, fantastic. And a lot of this stunts we were doing was publicity based, of course.
Russell, you touched on a few things there that I think are very much in line with this show. We're reaching out to people who are not happy doing what they're doing. They've been through some trauma in life and they want to change the world. They've just gone through coronavirus, and we know that's going to majorly disrupt pretty well everything. And they're sitting there thinking, if only I wanna, should I, could I? What's your advice to them?
Well, screw it, let's do it. Clearly, my advice to anyone is to progress an idea to the point where you can actually create a globally scalable, investable business. This actually happened to me 6 months ago. I was invited to be a mentor with the Founder Institute. Now, I'm a chartered accountant, and I've been a chartered accountant for over 30 years. I joined Virgin as one of the divisional accountants very early on, and I'm actually now the locally elected representative of the Association of Chartered Certified Accountants. It's a huge mouthful, but we're the largest accountancy body in the world. We've got over 200,000 members and 500,000 affiliates and students. And I was invited to be a mentor for the Founder Institute, which is a program which runs globally. It puts companies and ideas through the program and creates globally investable, scalable businesses. And I was chatting to a friend over a glass of wine, and we were saying, well, this sounds like a fantastic program. It's got great pedigree. Adeo Rossi in the US that runs it. He's an amazing entrepreneur, and they've got 4,000 companies they've put through this program. And I was explaining how good I thought the program was, and my friend said, well, if you really think it's that good, why don't you put your money where your mouth is and put an idea through? And we went, well, what on earth could we put through? And we tossed around some ideas, and we came up with this opportunity we felt was a problem that I've got personally. I've got 3 boys at a private school, and paying for their school fees is a challenge every year, and I think a lot of people have this challenge. We did some research, and we found that over 50% of private school fees are paid for by personal loans, mortgages, and the wider family. And there's a lot of peer pressure in Australia, especially, to go to the alma mater of the grandparents. So the parents might not be able to afford the school for their children, but the grandparents, because they went to a particular school, insist that the children attend that school, and then they contribute towards the school fees. So we did a lot more research around it, and we came up with this idea of crowdfunding for educational costs, and we call it feasible.co. And we put feasible.co through the Founder Institute program. It started with literally just an idea hatched over a glass of wine back in October 2019. And by 2020, it is registered a limited company, and we have opportunities for investors, and it's a globally scalable, investable business. So we're progressing that one at the moment. That's quite an exciting project.
So, Russell, the Founder Institute program seems to me like that could be a good starting point for someone who thinks they might want to be an entrepreneur, has no real idea about it, they've got a great idea. Is that a great filter to learn what it's really all about?
It's a hard program. It's 14 weeks of 30 hours worth of assignments, study, tests, but all of it is designed to create this globally scalable, investable business. So every week for 14 weeks, you're invited to pitch your idea to a bunch of mentors. And the mentors provide feedback, and they actually they score everything. Everything is gamified, so all your scores are recorded. And the idea is that if you don't score higher than a 2, and the Founder Institute have a rule that no 3s are allowed, so you can either get a 4-5 or a 1-2. If your average score is less than 3, so you get a 2 point something, you're given an even harder assignment. You're given an extra assignment, And this, I think, is, it kind of imitates the way that entrepreneurs work, is that you're faced with a problem. Generally, that problem gets harder. If you don't solve that problem, other problems arise. So they give you additional problems to solve and additional assignments. Now, luckily, feasible, we went through the program with the only business that I think we're aware of that wasn't given that extra assignment, and thank goodness we weren't, because I think if we were given that extra assignment, that extra 30 hours of work a week with other commitments, and I work as a part-time CFO with a number of businesses, so my full-time work, my paid gig, if you like, is actually earning money from other organisations that pay me to provide them with strategic financial advice and advisory board work. If we had got that extra assignment, I think that might have crumbled us. But one thing I can say is that I wouldn't have been able to do it without my friends. So to have a co-founder is a hugely important thing. So if you've got an idea, yes, try and build it into a business, but get a good team around you. Do what Branson does. Mm-hmm. Find the best and brightest, get somebody you can trust, bring them on board as co-founders, get an advisory board together. We've got an amazing advisory board. They range from marketing experts to business bankers to investment people who understand how fundraising works and the regulations behind that. I mean, that's not my game. But I think if you can get yourself a good advisory board and get yourself a co-founder and have that agreement drawn up first where you have your divorce papers in front of you before you start the agreement, before you start the project, set out what the divorce is going to look like, because that divorce is going to happen. And it may be a good divorce, in which case you're going to sell the business and you're going to make a lot of money and you're both going to walk away with a lot of cash in your hands, and that's a great divorce to have. Or it may end up with one party wanting to leave or one party wanting to go in a different direction, but always have that documentation. That's part of the Founder Institute advice. It's part of the documentation they provide you with, and they get you to put these agreements in place before you start. And having the foundations right and having the block work ready means that once you actually do expand into this globally scalable, investable business, and all the pressures come from investors and various other parties that want to influence the way in which the company grows and changes, I think you've got the opportunity there to have a basis from which you can go forward. You've got the groundwork done. They also encourage you to formulate your values. And as an organisation, I'm very keen to build values-based businesses. I think if you haven't got your values set, then it's very hard to know who you are, where you want to go, what do you want to be. And if you haven't got those values in place, then I think it's an impossible thing to create a globally scalable business without specific values. I remember back in Virgin days, there was a management consultancy brought in to work out what the values of Virgin were. Richard had grown this organisation from nothing to quite a substantial business by the time I joined in 94. When I joined Virgin Atlantic, there were 1,500 employees. By the time I left in 2000 to come down here to Australia, there were 10,000 employees. And at some point during that period, we pulled in, or Richard brought in some marketing gurus, and they worked out what the values of Virgin were. And to this day, I can tell you they're fun, innovation, caring, honesty, and value for money. That's it. And I can read them off my hand. Sorry, not my hand, but I could knock them off my fingers very easily because they were everywhere. They were tiles, roof tiles. They were cups. They were coffee mugs. They were coasters. There were values on the windows. Everywhere you went within the office at Crawley, which is where Virgin Atlantic's based, you'd see the values. And I think for 3 or 4 years, we had these values driven into us, but they were really what we believed anyway. So someone was just bringing to the fore what we already knew. They were just solidifying the thoughts of what we were actually doing. So when we came down to Australia to start Virgin Blue, we interviewed people on values. we asked them, were they fun? Were they caring? Were they honest? Did they provide value for money? And were they loyal? Those were the real things that stuck out from us from all the people we employed. And back in Easter weekend of 2000, we probably interviewed 1,000 people over that Easter weekend just to get ground crew. Obviously, the cabin crew being interviewed at the same time. The airline eventually launched in August 2000, but I came down in January 2000, worked for 3 or 4 months getting things set up. I was the first POM on the ground down here. And I worked with a guy called Rob Sherrard, who was ex-National Jet, and Bruce Highfield, who was the HR guy, and Manny Gill, finance, and Brett was the CEO. And we all came down. A chap called John Hughes did IT, and Richard Barker was communications. And we're still mates to this day. And we recently had an anniversary get-together about a year or so ago, and we ended up on a golf tour. And we meet around the world. But those people, they were all fun, value for money, caring, honest, and loyal. So all of these people bring the same set of values to the table. And over that long weekend, Easter weekend in 2000, when we interviewed literally 1,000 people, I think, over 3 days, it was 30 seconds. Tell me about yourself, tell me a funny story. And if you got past that 30 seconds, you were into the next stage of interviews. And I had to appoint nearly 400 ground service staff for Brisbane, Melbourne and Sydney. And that was a real fun time. But it's always fun when you've got capital behind you. And we were very lucky to have the support financially and the publicity of the Virgin Group, because everybody wanted to get in with Virgin at the time.
Yeah, I think you've introduced a very interesting thing there in the term fun. And I think a lot of people that probably are thinking about starting something, doing something, are coming out of a job that is not fun. The people who spend every day Wednesday celebrating the fact it's now closer to Friday than it is to Monday, and they hate what they do and they want to get out of it. And if they don't move into a role that becomes fun, whether with an organisation or starting their own business, it makes it, they're just repeating the same mistake over and over again. And if we're not enjoying what we're doing, we really need to ask ourselves, why are we doing it?
Yeah, agreed. And I think fun comes in a number of ways. And I think I liken it to, when you climb up a hill, it's bloody hard work. When you're walking up a hill, but when you get to the top of the hill, you get the view. You get the vista, and that's the fun part. Mm-hmm. People don't climb hills just to get fit. They go up to the top of the hill so they can get a vision of what you can see from the top of the hill. And that's like being an entrepreneur. You are working bloody hard. You work all the hours to make sure that the foundations are in place and the systems work, and you've got the accountant on your back all the time saying, well, where's the money coming from? Where's it going? You've got your cash flow forecast. You're doing all the aspects of creating a business, a live organisation, but you've got to have some fun. And that's getting to the top of the hill. So every time you achieve a milestone, celebrate it. Get that party happening with your friends, your co-founder, have some form of celebration so that you can have that fun and actually start enjoying the work that you're doing. And I think so many times when you're and I've done plenty of 9-to-5s as part of I think I'm the world's worst consultant. I really do. In so much that almost every organisation I go to consult with on a short-term basis either ends up employing me, and I end up there for 2 or 3 years, or I end up buying the business, because the guy or the people who own the business have said, well, this isn't much fun. We're not getting the fun that we're enjoying. And I think that's because they're just not achieving the milestones. But if you can set milestones in place, if you can get to a point where short-term, medium-term and long-term goals, and as you achieve those milestones, you celebrate them, whether that's through going out with your friends, going for a drink, or simply celebrating internally within the organisation by ringing a bell. I mean, I remember one organisation I worked for whenever they achieved a milestone, someone would ring a bell. Literally, there was a bell above a table and it would get rung. And that would cause a bit of fun within the organisation. So having that fun is important.
And Russell, I think it's becoming a more in thing. As it turns out, this afternoon I've got a brief to write a job description for the fun master of an organisation that's in the disability care business, which can be a very hard business. But the founder of that business, they've grown from 30 to 70. He has a vision to grow to 700 within the next year. And before they embark on that, they want someone whose responsibility is to make sure their clients, their staff, their stakeholders all are finding fun in their business. Branching off from that, as you know, I've mentored lots of startups at ThinkLab and New Ventures Institute. The common failings are all around the areas you've touched on. The founder believes they can do it all themselves. They believe their solution is something that everybody wants. And they have no clear understanding of the narrowness of the market they really need to get to. This whole notion of, as we wind up a little bit, identifying a problem that's worth solving, which is exactly what you've done with Feasible. What's the process people should look at in terms of finding problems they believe they can do something about?
Well, one of the important parts of the Founder Institute course is very early on. They force you to identify which of the United Nations problems you're going to solve. And there are 14 or 17 of these various issues around food deprivation, education, access to health, all of these very important human needs. And I think you really have to make sure that you're addressing a problem that's a globally scalable and globally addressable issue. Whether you're making vaccines for COVID, at the moment, of course, we're all in COVID lockdown, apart from South Australia, which is the safest state in Australia, of course. But in terms of solving a problem, it's got to be a problem that's faced by a lot of people. And if you can solve a problem that's faced by an enormous part of the world, then you've got half a chance. But if your solution is widgets for watchmakers, there aren't many watchmakers. And in fact, you've got to try and find a problem which solves an issue that's faced by people every day. And that's education, food, water, sanitary issues. There are so many problems that the world is facing these days. And they're not first world problems. There are many third world issues, as they call them, in terms of fresh water, food, access to education. These are all issues that the best and brightest minds should be addressing. And I think entrepreneurism gives you that opportunity to contribute to the world, contribute to your community, and actually provide a better world for your children.
Winding back on that theme, there are a lot of people now that instead of asking young people, what do you want to do, which leads them into being a doctor, a lawyer, or whatever, the more appropriate question is, what big problem in the world do you want to solve?
I agree. I think we are human beings, not human doings. Mm-hmm. I mean, that is fundamental to our nature, is that we want to help other people by being with them and being there to solve their problems. And I think you're right. Community collaboration, entrepreneurial work that's being done within the community. This is social entrepreneurs is a new concept, but it provides a great opportunity to help solve many of the world's biggest problems. I saw one opportunity just recently, which I thought was fantastic, where a young entrepreneur was providing socks for homeless people, because they found out that that's the biggest thing that people who are homeless miss. They don't have clean socks. Mm-hmm. It's as simple as that. So providing socks for homeless people as an entrepreneurial task, great. What a fantastic idea. So there's many of those around, from giving homeless people haircuts. That's a really good one, because that's happened recently. I've seen that going around, where it's more of a social networking function as opposed to a physical product or a service that's being offered. And today we're very clear that mental well-being, mental health, entrepreneurs and executives specifically are very have huge mental health issues that are not spoken about very much. And mental well-being is a massive issue for entrepreneurism, because there are dark times, there really are, when things don't go right and there are so many problems to resolve and you just can't see the wood for the trees. And to have a plan in place, and again, the Founder Institute does this for you. They put a plan in place for a go-to place. So what are you going to do when you're faced with a problem you can't resolve and you haven't got someone to resolve that with you? What's your plan? How are you going to get out of that? What's your mental well-being plan? And I think that's so important these days, to have that mental well-being plan in place.
Now, Russell, I've saved the easiest question for last. We're in a very difficult economic climate as we come out of the COVID thing. The world is hemorrhaging money. People are losing direction, losing jobs. You've got a day, and in that day you can get anything you want done to improve that situation. What is it?
Well, I think I'd get rid of all the governments in the world and put in place entrepreneurs, because I think, as we've seen just recently, government organisations like NASA have just contracted with SpaceX and Elon Musk, and they've got the most beautiful spaceship that's just been launched, taking people into space again from the US mainland for the first time in how many years. I heard it on the news. And the spacesuits are designed by a fashion designer. I mean, that would never have happened had it been a government organisation. Mm-hmm. So I think get rid of government organisations, get rid of these quasi-funded entrepreneurial assistance, and give money, or not give money, but allow entrepreneurs to work in those areas on an independent basis. So get rid of the government, get rid of the politicians, we're going to have anarchy, but through entrepreneurial anarchy.
Well, I heard Scott Morrison the other day, the Prime Minister, in a whole speech about where the world should go. I picked out one thing and one thing only. And he said he wanted to make sure that people that have a go get a go. And I reckon that should be what we all aspire to do. You know, we may not all be the doers, but let's give a hand up to those who want to have a go.
That's fantastic. That's a great way to end today's conversation. I think that's help people out of the hole as opposed to bury them.
Well, thank you, Russell. It's been a pleasure talking to you again. This conversation could occupy half a dozen episodes, but I think there was some great valuable advice in there, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Rick.